Great. All right, so our program tonight's about waterfowl, and if you'll have any questions, please write them in the chat box, and we'll give a try to answer them. We are not waterfowl experts, but we are very interested in waterfowl and have dug in and tried to learn something. I took the workshop by Bruce Anderson at Space Coast a couple times, and I invited him tonight. Bruce, are you on tonight? He may be showing up at some point, and he would be a good person to ask some of these questions. So these are sometimes called waterfowl, the double-crested cormorant, the common loon, the horned grebe, but they are not actually classically considered waterfowl. And the American coots are the most easily confused with ducks. They are in the rail family. So ducks, geese, and swans all have webbed feet, and coots, of course, do not. So what we're focusing on as waterfowl is the family Anatidae, which is the major part of the order Anseriformes. And it includes swans, geese, and ducks. And we're going to focus on ducks tonight. So one characteristic is the webbed feet, and you can see that here, this wood duck. They all have a uropygial gland. It's an oil-filled preening gland by the bird's tail, and they use their beaks to spread the oil across the feathers to make them waterproof. And their feathers, the waterfowl's feathers, allow them to regulate their body temperature and stay dry. And for waterproofing, the feather structure is very important that it be intact, so a yearly molt occurs so they can grow in new feathers. And I'll be talking about the timing of the molt. So in Florida, there are 4 duck species that breed here. The wood duck in forested wetlands, the mottled duck, a relative of the mallard, that is in wetlands, general more open wetlands, and the whistling ducks, black-bellied and fulvous whistling ducks. And we're going to be profiling all of these. My colleagues here will profile these different ones. In addition to those 4 that breed here, many species migrate here for the winter. And this picture shows winter ducks with American coots and overwintering black-necked stilts and avocets on the Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive. There are lots of ducks in at this point. Here's some basic duck biology. Only the females care for the young. That is in most of the ducks. Jack is going to point out that the whistling ducks are exceptions to that. And the female wears cricket camouflage plumage, whereas the male ducks, adorned with colorful plumage, put on elaborate courtship displays to attract females' attentions. Now, many species migrate here for the winter. I already said that. Am I going backwards? Okay. Migratory ducks pair up on the wintering grounds or in migration. This is an interesting fact. And then the males follow the females to the breeding grounds and stay until about the time the eggs are laid. And this enables a mixing of the population, because basically the females may be going back to the same breeding grounds, but the males who made up with them on the wintering grounds may end up going to a completely different, with a different female to a different breeding ground, allowing a mixing of the populations. And there are more males than females, and the males are promiscuous, so the ducks produce hybrids more often than other birds. And this is a neat picture of a cinnamon teal cross with a blue-ringed teal by Mary Keim from Orlando Wetlands Park a few years ago. So why do ducks migrate? I mean, we often wonder, when we've got all these ducks in here in the winter, why don't they just stay? They got plenty of wetlands here in the Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive and Orlando Wetlands Park and so forth. It's for food. The summer days are longer in the north, which gives ducks more time to feed their young on the tons and tons of insects and other invertebrates that hatch up there. Where do our winter ducks breed? There's a fabulous area called the Prairie Pothole region in the Dakotas and southern Canada, even into Iowa. What it is the area was scoured by glaciers and left all these pothole ponds that are very good duck habitat. And ducks are strong flyers. Migrating flocks of mallards travel an estimated 55 miles per hour. And ducks migrate at an altitude of 200 to 4,000 feet, but are capable of reaching much greater heights. Some have collided with airplanes, you might have heard before. And the ducks and geese in North America migrate along 4 flyways: the Pacific, the Central, the Mississippi, and the Atlantic. And these are very general, but they were figured out by banding research. And they're used for management purposes for waterfowl. As we know, sometimes we get a rarity that doesn't follow the flyway, comes out off course. But generally they follow these flyways. Now, hunting is a big industry. What keeps duck hunters from wiping out duck populations? Regulations and conservation programs started in the 1930s. And that was a period when drought dried up the wetlands. That's the period of the Dust Bowl. And that was when they started the duck stamps since 1934. Here's the first one. The artwork is by Ding Darling. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service produces these federal duck stamps every year. Duck hunters are required to purchase one, and they now sell for $25, and sales are approximately 40 million each year. By the way, there's an art contest each year, and the one on the right is the current one, 20 to 21. Beautiful blue-winged teal picture. And here's a cool Widgeon picture from a few years ago, back when it was 15. And this is the one that's coming up for 2022, a scop. And 98% of the purchase price of the duck stamps goes directly to buy and lease wetland habitats on national wildlife refuges. Over 6 million acres of strategic wetland and grassland habitat have been conserved through the duck stamps. So it's a great program, and birders are encouraged to buy duck stamps as well. And you can buy yours directly through the ABA, American Birding Association, and that way, as Kathy pointed out to me, there's a tracking of how many birders are buying them. Kathy, you just got yours in the mail today? You want to hold it up? Okay, beautiful.
Yeah, it came really fast too. So buy them through the ABA.
Okay. And by the way, there's a kids art contest too. There's a kids duck stamp as well. And the funding then from duck stamps contributes to the National Wildlife Refuge System. And I just want to talk about that just a second. This listing is the wildlife refuges in North Dakota. 33 of them. That's the state with the most wildlife refuges. And right there in the prairie pothole region, it's preserving a lot of that habitat. So then you might wonder, is there hunting on the wildlife refuges? Because if you Google North Dakota, you'll see a lot of waterfowl, you'll see a lot about hunting. It's a big industry in North Dakota where they breed. But that hunting is mostly on private land. I studied this a bit and found that these wildlife refuges do not allow hunting of waterfowl. It's just deer and other game. So the wildlife system, refuge system, is very important for preservation of these ducks. The most common duck in North America, and also the most popular for hunting, is the mallard. And Kathy's going to talk a little bit more about that. It doesn't come all the way down to our area naturally, but it's immensely common throughout the rest of the United States. And the second most common duck in the US is the blue-winged teal. And it is also, would be popular for hunting, but I figured this out by reading about duck hunting in North Dakota, that they have already migrated south in August and September before the hunting season starts. The hunting season doesn't start till November or December. So that's why it's not commonly hunted in North Dakota, just the mallard. All right, changing subject. Where specifically do ducks nest? In grasslands next to wetlands, So like to recover from migration and get ready to nest, the mallard and pintail hens feed in wetlands on protein-rich invertebrates like insects and snails. And once they've eaten enough, they explore the surrounding grassland to find the best places to nest. Dense, heavy vegetation is best for survival of mallard ducklings, studies have shown. Or they might nest over water. Redheads and canvasbacks make their nests right in the wetlands on floating mats of vegetation like cattails and bulrushes. Or in tree cavities. Wood ducks and hooded mergansers nest in holes in trees. And ducks can't create their own holes, so they depend on cavities created by woodpeckers or damage from decay, wind, or lightning. And they also will readily use man-made nest boxes. And we'll have profiles of all these species coming up. I want to point out that ducklings are precocial, which is kind of like precocious. They're ready to go, ready to feed themselves right after hatching. And they have a down which insulates and waterproofs them, so they're ready to swim right away, and makes them particularly cute. So any questions so far? This is a natural place to take a pause. I've talked about the 4 ducks that breed here, which is the wood duck, the mottled, and the black-bellied whistling and Faultless whistling ducks. And I've talked about how many migratory ducks come down thanks to our preserved wetlands here. And I've talked about duck conservation, the duck stamps and hunting, and then where they nest. And so please write any questions in the chat box. All right, going on. I want to distinguish between dabbling and diving ducks. Dabbling ducks eat more vegetation, some invertebrates, and they feed in shallower water. And diving ducks eat invertebrates and fish and feed in deeper water. And the pictures above are of dabblers. This is a widgeon feeding, and they tip like this with their butts up, or they move their beaks around in shallow water. That's also called dabbling. And the divers, you have seen them kind of kick off with their strong feet and dive, and they can dive fairly deep, depends on the species. By the way, I couldn't find a photo of this, so this is a shot you photographers might want to try to get the diving of diving duck. Another difference is the way they can spring into the air when disturbed. The dabbling ducks can spring right up, whereas the diving ducks, which are heavier, have to paddle on the water for a little while and then finally get airborne. Those are ringneck ducks on the right and green-winged teal and blue-winged teal on the left. Dabblers are also have more colorful wings. And here I'll just tell you a little bit about wing anatomy. These are the primary feathers. This is the top of the wing, by the way. The secondary feathers have a colored area called the speculum, and then the tertiary feathers. And then this area is called the upper wing covered, and this might be colored. Like in these blue-winged teal, I'm gonna use my cursor to show you these are the primaries. These are the secondaries, which are colored, and that's the speculum, called the speculum, it's green. And this blue is the upper wing coverts, also called a blue patch. And that's what you see immediately when the blue-winged teal flies. But at rest, they fold them under. So you don't even see that when they're at rest. On molting, the flight feathers need to be replaced once a year. And other birds have a sequential molt where different feathers are replaced, but the bird can still fly. But ducks have a synchronous molt of the flight feathers, dropping all the primaries and secondaries at once. And they become flightless for a few weeks while new flight feathers grow in. The females begin a partial body and head molt in spring on arrival at the breeding grounds, or even before. They nest and care for their young for 1 to 3 months, and then they replace their flight feathers, so they kind of stay in place while that happens. And the males, most molt into what we call eclipse plumage, which is kind of like a camouflage plumage, very similar to the female plumage in early summer. And by that time, they have abandoned their mates and may have left the breeding grounds. And then they replace their flight feathers. So presumably before migration south, so that they have the strong new flight feathers for that. And exceptions are the blue-winged teal, and to a lesser extent, the cinnamon teal and northern shoveler. Exceptions to the rule that most of them molt not only their flight feathers, but also their body feathers into the breeding plumage, the colorful plumage, because they're going to be breeding, they're going to be mating down in the migration area. But the blue-winged teal, and to a lesser extent, cinnamon teal and northern shoveler, when they arrive, they all look like females because they are in the eclipse plumage. It's an interesting thing you'll notice next fall. So mating occurs on the wintering grounds or in migration, and then the males follow the female to the breeding grounds and stay until about the time the eggs are laid. I've already said that. If you see the male, if you see any mating activity, there are not that many pictures I could find out there of that. And since they mate here on our wintering grounds, that's a shot somebody should try to get. So any questions so far? I've talked about the difference between the dabbling and the diving ducks, and my colleagues will be profiling different ones of those as we go. And then I've talked about molting. Any questions, put in the chat box. All right, well, I'm almost done with my part. I'm just going to profile a couple of birds, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. I'm going to profile the blue-winged teal, and its name is Spatula discourse. Its name used to be Anas, which is the type genus of the family Anatidae, the biggest genus, Anas. But it's been split out into the genus Spatula. And the few that I'm going to profile right here are all the ones that are split out. So the blue-winged teal, as I showed you before, they have the green speculum and the blue patch, chalky blue patch. And the male has a dark belly and the female has a light belly, but you don't even have to see that once you see that blue. Here's their distribution. They breed in the prairie pothole region and extension of that, and they winter in our area and further south into northern South America. And they come here quite early. Oops, I'm sorry. Yes, here I have the eBird occurrence map, occurrence chart, bar chart, showing that they're here in January. They have been found on, like in our area, this is Orange County, in the summer, but real rare. But they do come in August and September. So they're the earliest of the migrants coming in, blue-winged teal. And you might say the most common. I don't know. Does anybody want to argue with me that ringnecks are more common? All right, keep on going. And so, and again, it's very cool that they come, and these are males and females. You can't tell which because they're all in the eclipse plumage. And gradually during the season, you'll see that the males molt to their breeding plumage, and then they start pairing up. Okay, and let me go back. Oops, how do I go back? I'm having a little trouble going back. Oops. Okay, all right, this is the one I wanted to do. So cinnamon teal is also called Spatula, Cyanoptera, and it is a Western species. Here's its distribution. So when we see them here, you can understand why everybody gets so excited. They are really way off course. But they will hybridize with blue-winged teal, which are their congener, you say. They are related to them. And then the northern shoveler is also called Spatula, and it's bigger, so you don't really see the hybrids with the blue-winged teal, but it arrives a little later than the blue-winged teal. The males have the dark green heads, the white breasts, and the chestnut sides and belly. And it's also one where the males may arrive in eclipse plumage. It's not as strict as that the blue-winged teal, they all arrive in eclipse plumage, but you'll see a lot more females looking than males in the fall. And then you'll start seeing them molting in the blue feathers and these are the males. And this is the range of the northern shoveler. And so they winter in our area. And this is the bar chart. And so you see they're very rare in the summer months, but through the winter. And then I want to profile, my last one I think is the green-winged teal. It is not related. It's still left in the genus Anas. And it's the smallest of the dabblers. And this is the green wing and this is the blue wing. So you can see it's even smaller than the blue-winged teal. And it's got this brown, cinnamon brown head with the green patch. And it's got a little white thing on the wings, which is distinctive. And when they fly, they have white bellies, and you can see their green speculums, which really looks black most of the time, unless you've got the right light. And this is their range. This is where they breed. This is where they winter. So we don't see them too often, but from time to time, and they're really a cool bird. And here's a picture, you can contrast them, green wing and blue wing. And by the way, these photos, and Jack, you can go ahead and pull yours up, and this is my last slide. These pictures are by Mary Keim, a friend of ours from Audubon, who is a volunteer at Orlando Wetlands Park. She spends a lot of time out there and has caught some fabulous duck pictures. So we're happy we can use them. All right, if you have any questions, put them in the chat box, and I'm turning it over now to Jack.
Now, Glenn did have a question. Is there a quick way to identify a blue-winged teal from a green-winged teal?
Yes. Well, the blue patch, the light blue patch when they fly. Of course, you can't see that when they're resting. When they're resting, you can see the male will have, after they molt out of eclipse plumage, the male will have the crescent, and the female will be nearby by that point. They pair up. And the green wing, it's that rusty color. You'll be able to see that even in flight and even at a distance. It's distinctive. You might not see the green that well, but you'll see the rustiness. And then when they fly, they have a green speculum. And they're both small, and they kind of are about the size of coots. So you'll see them in there with the coots. All right, great question. And now on to Jack. Thank you for your.
Hey folks, I'm going to be talking about two whistling ducks, which used to be called tree ducks. They are a subfamily of the duck, goose, and swan family of birds. They are not true ducks, and in some schemes they are considered a separate family altogether. There are 8 species currently. Most agree there's 8. There's a West Indian whistling duck, a wandering whistling duck, the black-belly, which is one that's around here that I'm going to talk about first, a Faultless that I'm going to talk about second. There's a plumed, there's a spotted, there's a lesser, and there's a white-faced whistling ducks in other parts of the world. So let's talk about the black-bellied whistling ducks. And they are formerly called the black-bellied tree ducks. They are restricted to the New World. They're highly gregarious. They're found in large flocks. They're highly adapted to perching and climbing. They're skillful walkers. They stand and walk with a vertical posture, very much straight up and down. They seldom swim in deep water. They're distinguished from other whistling ducks by its red bill, pink feet, white wing patch, and is more likely to roost in a tree than any other whistling ducks. And it's very vocal in flight with a repeated whistling sound. It nests primarily in native cavities in trees, but will readily use nest boxes. Individuals are attracted to areas where corn and rice are grown and can cause crop damage. And that's where most of the studies come from about the crop damage. The status of the species appears to be secure due to it, in part because its secluded habitats and also its lack of importance as a game species. They are showing signs of range expansion in the United States. They do form lifelong pairs, and they also breed in the first season. They are markedly nocturnal. During winter months, black-bellied whistling ducks begin flights at sunset and roost from their roost ponds to feeding areas. And there are a ton of them at the Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive, quite often right by the side of the road. And then often out there, you'll find them standing in the middle of the road and just hanging out and somewhat resistant to move. And if they do move, they typically will just fly right around you and land behind you. Next, we're going to look at Faultless whistling ducks. This picture is a group that was, I was actually waiting for a peregrine falcon to show up, and this group was in front of me, and they were just diving over and over and over. It looked like they were cleaning themselves and occasionally yapping at one another, and it was just amazing to watch because a large group and just over and over and over. These are formerly the Faultless Faultless tree duck. It's one of the most widely distributed species of waterfowl in the world, currently mostly in tropic and subtropic regions, but also in temperate areas of the Americas, Africa, and Asia. There's its range. Unlike the black-bellied whistling duck, this species will nest on the ground in marsh vegetation and in artificial habitats such as shallowly flooded rice fields. Whereas most ducks nesting in temperate regions pair seasonally for one reproductive cycle, bear ponds of Faultless whistling ducks are suspected to be long-term, extending over multiple nesting seasons or the lifetime of the individuals, as in geese and swans. Males and females share equally in the incubation, and males also assist in the rearing of the young. Thus, males contribute to parental care to a greater extent in this species than in any other small to medium-sized waterfowl. This species is perhaps the least studied of the common North American waterfowl. To date, studies have conducted primarily in agricultural regions, which I alluded to earlier, of North and South America at the fringes of the species breeding distribution, and have focused mostly on the duck's importance as an agricultural pest. Consequently, many aspects of the species' behaviors, movements, and life history are unknown, or known only from the captive studies or studies conducted outside the core breeding and wintering areas. I don't know if any of you know of who Eddie the Eagle was or is, but this flight shot reminds me of Eddie the Eagle for some reason. When they do gather together, and they're all over the Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive, it's one of the best places perhaps in the state to see them, and to see them up close. Your vehicle acts as a great blind. Coots will intermix with them as well as other waterfowl. And also on the Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive, they will gather around areas where they're doing their diving under, but also areas where there is sticks in the water sticking up, and they literally will fight over those. It's almost like King of the Hill. And then whoever gets up there gets to groom for a while, and then somebody else comes along and knocks them off, and they continue doing that. So if you see a group of them and you see some sticks, hang around, and you will see them doing that. Advance that. Next, I'm going to talk about the wood duck. They're just gorgeous ducks. The wood duck is a common bird. It hangs out in the area of land between the river and stream, in wooded swamps, freshwater marshes. It is also the most successful of the 7 species of North American ducks that regularly nest in natural cavities. This species' bodies and eyes appear well adapted to the wooded habitat it favors. Its slim body allows for use of pileated woodpecker cavities for nesting. Its large eyes help to avoid branches on flights through the tree canopy. And here's a range map. This species is much sought after by hunters, comprising about 10% of the annual duck harvest in the United States. Wood ducks are readily acceptable to human activity, with substantial numbers nesting in urban areas. And there's an in-flight shot. Number of natural nest cavities are low in many areas. And there's a mama with some babies. And thanks, Sam, for the photos. Overall impact of nest boxes on population size is not well understood, but effects generally seem to have been beneficial. Production from large-scale nest box programs can have a positive impact on fall populations. Regulations limiting the kill of wood ducks have played a major role in this species' comeback. There's a beautiful head-on shot with that breastplate of the male. It's just gorgeous. And this is a photo of one that is using a pileated woodpecker cavity for nesting. Another in-flight shot. This is from the home I grew up with in College Park. We had 2 of these out in the lake. Get a garden hose and a piece of wood for a dock and jet it into the lake bottom, and you can slide PVC pipes over it, and you can stack them on top. You don't even have to glue them, and attach the house, and they will show up. They're quite amusing to watch, and quite often the male will just stand there, and the female will march back and forth, looking down in a hole. When she does enter the nest, she enters it flying straight on, no braking, and just hits the hole hard. It's amazing to watch. But that's the wood duck. Next up is
Me. Okay.
Kathy.
Yes. There is a question before I start. So Glenn asks, where are wood ducks most commonly found in Central Florida at this time? By the edge of a lake or further out?
I know of 2 places. There's a lake down in Maitland in the middle of the town. It looks to be a park. I've never been there, but on eBird, it's a quite popular place for wood ducks and many other things. And from the photos associated with it, it looks like they come in quite close. I was told by another photographer out of the West Coast that they're practically tame there. And then also I've gotten some shots at the park that is by the Greenwood Cemetery in downtown Orlando. I don't know where you guys have Sam or Deborah or Kathy.
Davis has a lot of wood ducks too.
Right. And Annette says, I think the lake you were talking about is Lake Lily in Maitland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also Mead Gardens.
Mhm.
There was a ton through there through the early fall as well.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah, there we go. All right. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to talk about 3 of my favorite ducks. Of course, I like all the ducks, so, you can't pick a favorite. The hooded merganser, and don't we love these ducks? They are so gorgeous. The 3 ducks I'm going to talk about are diving ducks. The hooded merganser is the smallest of the 3 North American mergansers, and it's the only one that's restricted to North America. They do breed in forested east and northwest, and they do require cavities for nesting. They're most common in the Great Lakes region. They do like to feed on small fish. and aquatic insects, crustaceans, and particularly crayfish, which surprised me. You can go ahead and advance it one here. All right, there's the female. I think they're just so expressive with those crests. It's fun to watch them. They definitely use their crests in partially communication. They're just really, really cool ducks. So you can go ahead and advance it another one. So here's a picture, thanks to Jack, of one with a nice catch there. Yeah, he's got himself a good meal. They do have really good underwater vision for catching their prey. And you can see this kind of in here, like other mergansers, they have a long, narrow, serrated bill. And you can go ahead and advance it another one. And the male is distinguished from other species by its flashy, white, fan-shaped crest. And here on their wintering grounds, you often see the males interacting with each other. And I love it when they do this and they tilt their head back and they're displaying to each other. It's just a lot of fun to watch. So go ahead and advance it another. And looking at them from the back, they just have these really, really neat patterns. So just when you find a group of them, just watch them. And they're just so busily moving around and everything. Okay, I'm just looking there. Okay, you can go ahead and advance another one. Here's one that, you know, you'll see them kind of, this one's tilted a little bit, moving around. You can see they're kind of light underneath. I go ahead and advance another one. I'm going to talk about their flight. So in flight, they're similar to a wood duck, but when you see them flying, they're going to be flying faster and they have a more streamlined look. And like Sam was telling me, they fly like straighter, and the wood ducks are a little bit more erratic. So, you know, as you're becoming a more skilled birder, you know, those are the kinds of clues to look for in flight so that you can learn to identify them from a little bit more distance. When you see them in flight, you'll see almost triangular wings, and you'll see that little white coloration there behind the primaries. These mergansers do nest in tree cavities, and the ducklings, they leap out at 1 day old. And the nest may be up to 50 feet high. And at times the ducklings may have to walk a half a mile or more to the closest body of water. And I think that's true for other species, because I know across the street from my house, we're probably about 100 yards from the water. The neighbor had both black-bellied whistling-ducks and wood ducks nesting there, and I got lucky to see the ducklings jump out and wait for the parent to take them to the water. So I think that must be a common thing with these nesting, tree cavity nesting ducks. You go ahead and advance it one more. Here's their range. As you can see, they do winter here in Florida, and you can see and they're found, you know, like you can go to the rest of the Southeast and find them year round. You go ahead and advance it another one. And so as we switch to the red-breasted merganser, all these diving ducks have their legs far back on their bodies, which helps them dive really well, but it doesn't help them walk on land very much. So I know that from personal experience, one place I go to look for the mergansers is Fields of Fame, which is in Apopka. There's 2 like retention ponds, and usually you'll find, like last year, there was at one point, there was over 100. And you'd see them on the shore and they looked so awkward. They looked really strange out of land. You didn't see them walking around much. They were mostly just preening. So here's the red-breasted merganser. You're not going to see them much in our area because they prefer salt water, but occasionally we get them come into the wildlife drive and perhaps Orlando wetlands. So this bird is also known as a sawbill, and they have a slim profile. They're long-bodied, and they have the long, thin bill and a shaggy crest of feathers on their head. They're larger than a ruddy duck, and they're smaller than a common loon. And the males, if you look behind me, I didn't realize I had this picture until I was looking. The picture behind me was taken at Fort DeSoto in spring. I was surprised to see this duck. but they have a beautiful cinnamon chest, white neckband, and a shaggy green head. And the females and non-breeding males are brownish gray with a shaggy brown head. And in flight, the males and the females have a prominent white lower wing panel. You can go ahead and advance it. So here they are in flight. They fly at an angle with their head higher than their feet. You can kind of see that in the picture. And when they're in the water, they're going to sit kind of low and swim with their head partially submerged. You can go ahead and advance it. There's a beautiful male in breeding plumage, which we would not be likely to see. They breed in the boreal forest, brackish, fresh, and saltwater wetlands, usually near the coast. In the winter, they tend to be near saltwater, so you're more likely to see them Merritt Island, Fort DeSoto, those kind of places. And here's a fun fact to see if I get anyone in the chat to answer. They're one of the fastest flying ducks. So anyone want to type in how many miles an hour they fly? And I'll check. You can tell I'm a teacher. I'll check the chat to see if anyone comes up with a guess while I'm talking. And so while you're doing that, you can see their range. Oh, 60. Okay, a little bit higher. All right. It's higher than 60. Daisy and Shauna, go up a little bit more. We'll give a couple more guesses there. Yes, Shauna, good job. It's actually 80. They can fly up to 81 miles an hour. Can you imagine that? And here you see their breeding range. And their populations are pretty stable. Yeah, it is pretty impressive. That's why when they fly by, you better look quick, right? That makes me feel better when I miss them. Okay, the next duck I'm going to talk about is also one of my favorites, and it's the Bufflehead. And they're small and compact, and they're diving ducks, and they have a large roundish head and short wide bills. They're larger than a pied-billed grebe, but they're smaller than a common goldeneye. Of course, a goldeneye is pretty rare to see around here. You're more likely to see Bufflehead. So this photo here was taken at St. Mark's when we went up on our Audubon trip last year. And it was interesting to see at St. Mark's, they were in the saltwater side of St. Mark's. When I've seen them here, of course, in Central Florida, they'll be in freshwater. So they will go both. And here you see males in breeding plumage. They have the dark head with a large white patch that wraps around the back of their head. And then the females and first-year males are gray-brown where they have an oval white cheek patch. That's one way you're going to identify them when you see them. You go ahead and advance it. The beautiful males, this doesn't pick up their color, but the top of their forehead has a purplish sheen. It's amazing. They're just beautiful. Okay, and go ahead and advance it. And this is a female that I photographed. This also at Fields of Fame. That's where we found them last year, though Sam has told me there's a pond in Apopka off of 441 that right now you can see. Occasionally we've had them on the wildlife drive. I don't know that we're seeing them there this year, or at least not yet. So in flight, go ahead and advance it. Oh, okay, I'll talk about this picture. So last year when I was in Georgia, at this lake, I saw the goose far away, and I was like, what is that tiny duck next to it? And that gives you a good size perspective on how little these are. They're like little, rubber ducks. Because what they'll do is they're able to compress their feathers and go down really deep and fast and dive for their prey. And then once they get what they want, they pop back up like a little bobber. And it's just, and usually they're kind of synchronized. They'll be in a little group. And they're diving for invertebrates, crustaceans, and mollusks. And they usually swallow their food whole underwater. In the fall and winter, they will eat seeds of pondweeds and bulrushes and stuff like that. You can go ahead and advance it. All right, this is a beautiful flight shot that you can see. In flight, they have fast wing beats and they will rock side to side. And they do take flight like other diving ducks by running a short distance in the water. And they're seldom seen on dry land. I've never seen one on dry land. And go ahead and advance it. You can see their range. Nope, that's them at Fields of Fame. It's really hard to photograph them because when they're feeding, they're just diving down and then they'll pop up for 2 seconds and they'll dive down. So it's a lot of fun, and it was neat that I got them all 4 up. So for an amateur, I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. All right, and I think I have one more slide that shows their range. So you can see they're way up there in the north. And even though it doesn't show them here, we do get them. It's just you're going to have to look a little bit harder for them, but they're definitely worth finding. So I believe next up is Susan, I think. Turn it over to her.
So we're going to have a little quiz now. Sorry. We're going to have a little quiz. Which one of these ducks doesn't belong? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Okay, Terry says 3. Anybody else? 3. Oh man, everybody's got 3. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Aha. So actually, mallard ducks, all of our domestic ducks actually come from mallard ducks. And if you do see when you're doing an eBird list, that white one is going to be a mallard domestic, whereas number 4 is our odd one out. He is a mottled duck. So as you can see, the mallards, they have the beautiful plumage, typical, the green head, the white line around the neck. One of the ways kind of to tell the different mallards, the speculum is that like violety blue with the white line on it. Whereas the mottled duck, if you look, it's like a violety blue, but it has a dark edge to it. They also have a lighter head with a brown cap and eye line. So we can go to the next one. So if you look on the left, obviously that's the breeding plumage. You can see they have the orange legs. They have a little bit of tail curl. I don't know if you notice that. That's kind of very typical also of a mallard. On the right, the first 2 ducks are actually some of the mallards, some of the males in more of the eclipse plumage. So they're kind of mottled, but they're not quite as regular as the female, which is the one on the far right with a little bit darker orange beak. So that is the female. They are like a mottled brown color, the females with the stripe and the black head. They have a little bit more, a little bit darker beak. They do eat 9 of 10, like 90% of the diet is vegetable matter. Most of the mallards, we do kind of have them. We can go to the next one. So it is the most common species of duck in North America. And we do have some in our range, but typically we don't see a whole lot of true mallards here because mallards are very prolific and they kind of hybridize with a lot of different things. We do get a lot of different ducks that are actually released. A lot of people do have them just for decorative. They get mallards for their ponds. A lot of Easter, the ducks you get for Easter are actually mallards. They are, you know, so different types of mallards. You may see a lot of different hybrids. They're pretty uncommon if you go to South Florida. I think Florida BirdLife says they're seen as far south as Titusville and the Kissimmee River. So that's kind of where their natural southern border is. They do breed up in the Arctic and then obviously come back down and winter down with us in the south. So we can go to the next one. So they frequently hybridize with pretty much everything, as you can see. So there's a lot of people who say there are very few pure mallards in Florida. So I have another quiz. The picture is a mallard hybrid with which duck? See if you can identify it. It's kind of one we haven't looked at yet, but see if anybody knows what duck that's a hybrid of. Terry's got it, pintail duck. So that's a mallard pintail hybrid. And we'll kind of take a look at the pintails in a little bit. So we're going to go to the next one we're going to look at, and is a mottled duck. Some mottled ducks, as you can see, they're pretty much a Florida duck. And I think they used to actually be called a Florida duck, part of them. some of the older ornithology books, they had a separate modeled in Florida ducks, whereas the Florida duck had the cleaner necks and mottled ducks had a little bit more streaking, but I think they've put them together and realized they're actually kind of the same duck. They are around the Gulf Coast, and we do have them year round. If you go out to some of the native ponds, you'll see them more in the back. They have a warm dark brown body with a contrasting paler head and neck, the brown cap and the eye, a stripe, orange legs and feet, and we can go to the next one. The females will sometimes have that little spot. If you take a look at that bottom left, that little smudge under the eye line. It's not always there, but they will often have that too. Let's see, the purple, they do have the purple with the dark edges on it. So we can go to the next one. We'll take a look in flight. They do have the white under the wings, the axillary. On the trailing edge of the speculum, if you look closely, there's a little white line. So that's kind of one of the indicating features of a mottled duck is that little white line on the edge of the speculum. So they're going to have dark bodies, light heads, that white axillary, and that little line along those secondaries on the edge of the secondaries. And I think Shauna is, how do you tell a difference between the mottled and a female mallard? Well, if you get to see the speculum, they're going to be different colored. The mottled's going to have that dark edges, and the female mallard is going to have the white edges. There's a little bit of difference. The plain faces are a little bit different. See how they have that pale head? That's going to look a little bit different from the female mallards also. Next. Widgeon. Okay, these ducks at one time were called by ornithologists bald pates. So that's because that little white at the front of the head kind of made them look like bald ducks. It's kind of cute actually. So they have that green head with that, I guess, the white bald section in the front, a little bit darker neck, chestnut body. In the males especially have a nice black rear with some white. And that's kind of one of the features of them is you'll see that black. If you look up in where they're flying, you can see that black. The tails and the rear is just a nice chunk of black, makes it easier to see. They do have the white, more of a white speculum or a white patch, I guess you would call it. If you look closely at the sitting male, you can see that those primaries are edged in white, whereas the female, which is on the far right, they're kind of edged in a little bit darker color. And we can go to the next. So they are seen only in the winter time. We get them wintering here. They do breed way up in the north, in the, that Canadian prairies and the Arctic tundra. They're very good. They like to eat vegetation. They eat more vegetation than most of these dabbling ducks because of their beak size is very short. So it's easier for them to pull up the vegetation. So they will, as you can see, the last seen in 2020 was around, for Orange County, March, and they're first seen around October. So if we want to move to the next one. And here's another guideline that you can kind of see a little bit of that white wing patch on the male, the green head, the cream forehead, pale edged primaries, whereas the female has that rusty brown flanks. The male has the pale pink flanks. Some of the chestnut on the edges. And then the female just has kind of like a little spot around the eye. They have very short gray beaks with little black tips. And I think Delcy said she got some good pictures of them in Lake Apopka a few weeks ago. So that's great. And let's go to the next. So one of the things I thought that was interesting is that the widgeons eat things called duckweed, pondweed, water milfoil, and widgeon grass. And I thought, well, that's kind of a coincidence, widgeon grass. So I was wondering which came first, the grass or the bird? And actually, widgeon grass is named for the bird. So I thought that was kind of an interesting little fact about widgeons, that they actually have a grass name for them. Next. All right, so I just wanted to show you there are a small number of males, the one on the left, that have white on the cheeks and throat, which hunters often refer to as a storm widgeon. You can kind of see the difference with the standard male on the right. Has kind of a little bit darker neck. So when you see a lot of widgeons, you can kind of see if you can find a storm widgeon in there. It's just kind of a fun little difference that might pop up in some of the birds that you see. They are actually an easily startled bird, so they will take off. You can't get too close or they'll take off. And well, let's go to the next one. Okay, gadwalls, they're about the size of widgeons. This is the male and the female. Most of our dabbling ducks have pretty bright colors for breeding plumage, but not the gadwall. I mean, it's very pretty. It's very finely textured, browns and blacks. They have a white belly and the black rump. They have white secondaries. The bill is kind of a slate gray, and the females is a little bit darker orange with more spotting than, let's say, mallard. They also have that very flat beak if you look at it. They often say the female has kind of a square head, the way they have that, the slope of the forehead looks a little bit squarer. They like to hang with widgeons and coots, and they actually will snatch feet, like they'll take the food away from a diving duck or a coot is one of the things they like to do. So to differentiate the female gadwall from like the other, like a mallard, you can look at the shorter beak, a little bit more white in the wing, a little bit flatter beak. And we can go next. Again, these then they are going to be breeding up kind of somewhat in some of the prairie potholes and on the west. And they're only going to be wintering down here. As you can see, they're kind of they start around October and they're going to end in March in the same time. So very cute little duck. And if we go to the next slide, you can look for the black rumps on the male. They have a nice white body and the white wing patches to help pick them up from other ducks. Very good. And the next duck we're going to talk about is the northern pintail. Very elegant duck, very beautiful duck. This is breeding plumage. They have a little bit longer pointy tail, a black rear and tail, a chestnut head with that beautiful pinstripe that kind of goes up, a nice gray bill with the black edge. They're very slender. In flight, you can see a green speculum. The female looks bronze, the speculum. And if we go to the next one, if in flight, you can see they have a very long neck and tail, and that's kind of one of the differentiating features. They also have a white, I guess, tailing edge of the secondaries, you could call it, or under the speculum with the green speculum, and that's going to help you identify also. The female is a little more plain, still has the dark bill, very finely textured patterning on it. And we can go to the next one. They're actually a very social duck. They congregate with a lot of other ducks, and they seem to get along with everybody. And that's the end of those ducks. Any questions about any of those ducks? They're very pretty ducks, very gorgeous.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. I'm Sam, everybody. I'll try to be quick because I know we're coming over our time already. So the first duck I'm going to talk about is the Canvasback, one of my favorite birds. It's actually the largest duck that we see down here. It's relatively about the same size as the Pintail, but the Pintail, like she just said, is much more elegant and slender, whereas this is kind of a beefier, meaty duck. We're still seeing them out at Lake Apopka right now. They're even larger than the shovelhead, which for myself, I always established that those were always the biggest duck we see. But when you see these guys, they really stand out, especially with that long sloping forehead and just like it's kind of like a one-piece head that just kind of really stands out when it's in a group of ducks or even in a distance. If you're not in scope distance or just looking out, if it's mixed in with anything else, you can definitively see that it's a Canvasback. They're highly visible and active during non-breeding, which is when we see them. We don't really see any courtship displays down here. It's more just fighting over food and just kind of hanging out. So once they do go back way north for, breeding, they're very monogamous and secretive. Like they're just harder to find. So they breed over water. Same kind of thing that Deb mentioned in these established ponds and marshes. An interesting thing with them is if there's an extreme drought, they'll delay their breeding. It's kind of like they know whether their ducklings are going to survive or not. So they're omnivorous, mainly plants, but they'll take small clams and snails as well. You can go to the next slide if you want. Another thing, just again, because I think they're so big and meaty, but one thing I didn't know is they dive close to 30 feet. They've been recorded doing that, which I think is super interesting. And especially if you're trying to take pictures of them, you'll notice they stay down for a while and you're not sure where they're going to pop back up. Like most of these ducks, they sleep on the water with their head tucked in. This is one of the only ducks that's found only in North America. And like I said, for the female, they're almost, about the same size. Again, that head shape is what's going to really ID it for you. But they're lighter and rufous, brownish gray overall. They don't have that really bright head or the black chest like the male does. And then I've got the bar chart in there. And like most of these ducks, with the exception of the wood duck, we see all of these pretty much October through April, May. You'll get some stragglers early and late. So that's about it on the Canvasback. We can go to the next slide, Jack. So the Redhead, it's another big duck. It's about 19 inches. And interestingly, we get a few of those on the drive, but I was just out at Merritt Island. Black Point has a ton of them, and they're mixed in with the Pintails around stop 8. So if anybody's looking to check these guys out, they were super close, didn't seem very skittish, and they're with the male Pintails and female Pintails, which is two really cool ducks to try to get pictures of. So keep that in mind. An interesting thing with these ducks, when they're breeding, they show what's called brood parasitism, and more so than any other duck in North America. And basically what that means is the breeding female will choose one of 3 strategies. She'll either lay her own clutch, she'll parasitize another nest before laying her clutch, or she parasitizes somebody else's nest and doesn't produce a clutch of her own and just pitches in there. As Deb mentioned, and pretty much everybody else, both of these ducks take flight by running on the water before they become airborne. And an interesting point that I found was the female initiates the flight of the paired birds, which is more in the breeding grounds than down here, but she'll do repeated chin lifts. And I guess it kind of tells them like, hey, we got to go. So, and then they take off, and they fly with a direct rapid wing beats as well. Again, the female on these birds, which, almost most of the birds we talk about, they're going to be a little bit more rufous, not near as colorful. The male has to win them over with their good looks. I always associate it with male and female cardinals. It's almost like that with, a ton of birds other than birds of prey. But actually, Barb Taylor got a really good female redhead during the Christmas bird count out in a little retention pond, which was kind of a good find out in Lake Mary. So we can go to the next slide. And just a little bit more, basically what I've talked about. All of these birds kind of have the same distribution that we've been talking about tonight. I was kind of looking through everybody's lists, and but you can see we get them down here during non-breeding. And again, it's the same thing around that October through April, May. It's about the latest you're going to see them. And they're a hard duck to find. Like I said, we've had a few out at Apopka. I haven't seen reports lately, but I will be looking for them tomorrow. So next slide. All right. I don't know if anybody's familiar with these birds, but they are a giant pain to try to identify the difference between the two. And this is the greater and lesser scout. We definitely get way more lesser than we do greater, but over the early fall, when I say we, not just me that was making the mistake, but there was a few and some really good birders. We had 3 birds out on the lakeside of Lake Apopka, and we were all identifying them as lesser scout for months. And finally, somebody looked at some pictures and decided that 1 was a greater and 2 lesser. And it was 2 males and a female. And I'll brush over this, but I'll also put in the chat my email. I've got a great article that Tom Rodriguez sent me that basically tries to explain this the way I'm going to explain it, but it's they're super tough birds to tell apart, and I'll make it even worse when we get to ringneck duck. So just enjoy that. So anyway, these are, you know, mid-sized birds, around 18 inches for the greater, 16 and a half for the lesser, which is about the same size as the ringneck and most of the ducks we see. So for the lesser, one of the main ID points, they have crown feathers that you can see that form a peak towards the rear of the head, kind of behind the eye. And with that, it makes it like a rounder, puffier head. And so when you're looking at the two together, it gives it almost like a hairdo on top. But of course, these are diving ducks, so they're coming up wet, and they're just super tough to tell apart. One other key factor for them, the greater is usually, and it's not in this picture, but everything that you read is they seem a little bit wider on the sides. And the greater, it seems like it's just a bigger bird, but even side by side, they're super tough to tell. So the name's kind of deceiving when you're looking at these, and obviously looking at these pictures on the females, same thing. Super drab bird, very rufous, and they're tough. I think you can go to the next slide. It may have a better view. Yeah, so here we go. On these two birds, the greater, they both have what they call a nail on the tip of their bill, which a lot of these diving ducks do. But if you see on the greater, it's got more of a smudgy end and a little bit more coloration to it. And again, these ducks are moving fast. They're diving. They're popping back up. You know, it's another reason to get a camera, because these are really tough to ID. So you almost have to side by side them on anything. You know, like I said, the greater's a little bit bigger, but unless they're together, and the only saving grace with that is we don't get a ton of the greater. They're a lot of times more associated with saltwater. But the black nail tip being a little bit bigger on the greater, and that head shape being a little bit more rounded on the greater and a little bit more peaked on the lesser is going to help you. Again, I curse these birds a lot, so I'm sure hopefully you'll have better luck than I do. So next slide, please. All right, ringneck ducks. So these look very similar, especially when you're new to birding, as I am, and you know, every day's a learning curve. So the ringneck duck, the male has a black head and neck, breast and upper parts, and whitish to gray belly and flanks. They have this distinctive triangular wedge, which you can kind of see up underneath that male's beak. that almost looks like a little handkerchief on his side, right under the folded wing. The short crest at the back makes it a little bit, makes it seem angular and more of a peaked head, which you can see in the kind of blurry male in the back there. The other thing too, if you notice, they've got a nail as well, but it's pretty much the whole tip of their beak is black. And then they've got this ring around the bill. And like, if you're like me, you'll be saying, you know, why is it not called a ring-billed duck? Well, if you Google or type in ringbill, this is the duck that comes up. This duck was named way back when they were actually holding birds in their hand to ID them. And there is a very faint cinnamon colored ring on their neck. But even in the best light, it's, you know, kind of like seeing a shooting star. You'll never see it. A lot of people in the birding field are, you know, they complain and want to change it to ring-billed duck. A lot of people that you run into call them ring-billed ducks. And the interesting thing is both male and female will have that ring bill, which makes it easier to separate from the scalp. But a lot of times they're running in the same groups. So they're hard. So all I can say is try to take pictures of them and, you know, good luck. So that's about it on those ducks for me. So if anybody has any questions, I will try to answer them. Let me look at this.
I think Shauna had a question.
Oh yeah, Shauna, I had the same issue. I sent Paul Huber a picture of what I thought was a greater scalp because I had read that the green sheen and the purple sheen, and it's a way to separate them. And I had them at Lake Eola during the June challenge, super close, took great pictures, sent them to him, and he was like, no, these are both lesser. And so the sheen, the color doesn't really matter. I've read that, you know, one is the other and one is the other, but it's not. They both have, it depends on the light, and they're kind of iridescent head feathers. So they kind of change with the light, but I made the exact same mistake. So it's, they're not fun, but they are very pretty and very good looking ducks. So thanks everybody. That's all I got.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's getting late, so we'll let you go, and we'll hopefully see you next week.